8.2b is about writing an equation of a parabola. So instead of having an equation and using it to graph our parabola, we're going to be given a parabola and we're going to use that to write a quadratic equation. Take a second to pause the video and read through these directions. These are the 5 steps you're going to use to write the equation from a graph. Writing the equation from a graph revolves around this equation up here. Y equals A times x minus p times x minus q. So anytime you hear me referring to plugging something in, or the variables A, x, p, and q, this is what I'm talking about. So refer back to this. Let's look at a couple of examples. Number 1. So here's our graph, right? And we're going to write the equation of a parabola. So step 1 said to substitute the intercepts for our variables p and q. Well, if we are looking, let's go ahead and take a glance and figure out what our intercepts are. We've got the intercept -3, 0, and 1, 0. So we have our two x values. We have x is -3 and x is +1. I'm going to let p equal -3 and q equal 1. I could flip it around. It really doesn't matter. And now I'm going to plug it into this equation. So y equals a times x minus p becomes x minus a -3 times x minus q becomes x minus 1. Okay, I'm going to quickly remember minus a negative really means adding, so I'm going to rewrite this as a times x plus 3 times x minus 1. Okay? Notice how our signs flip, and that's what should happen. This was negative, so our factor is adding. This was a positive q, so our factor is subtracting. Well, step 2 said to substitute another point in for our x and our y. So let's take a look at our graph and find a point we haven't used yet. Now, it can be any point on our graph. I'm going to use the point -1, 2, because they already found it for me. But again, it could be any other point on this graph. It wouldn't matter. But I'm going to use -1, 2, so my x value is -1. My y value is 2. So let's go ahead and we're going to plug those into our equation. Well, y is +2. We still don't know what a is. X is -1, so we have -1 plus 3 times -1 minus 1. So now that we found our p and our q, and we have an x and a y that we randomly picked, notice that a is our only variable. So since a is our only variable, we can solve for a. So we can figure out what that a value is. Well, 2 stays the same as equal to a. -1 plus 3 is 2. -1 minus 1 is -2. Well, 2 equals a. 2 times -2 is -4. If I'm multiplying by -4, the opposite of multiplying by -4 is dividing. 2 divided by -4, I can simplify that to -1/2. So my a value is -1/2. So I'm going to plug my a, my p, and my q into this original equation and see what I have all together right now. So at this moment in time, so far we have y equals -1/2 times x plus 3 times x minus 1. So we are all the way up to step number 5. Okay, our last step is just to take what we have, right, what we have with our a, p, and q values, and to multiply it out. So multiply it out, you can use your box method, or you can use your arrows. I'm going to use my arrows, so x times x, and I'm going to multiply my factors first and then multiply that a value at the end. That just makes it a little bit faster. So always multiply your factors first and then multiply that a value very last. X times x is x squared. X times -1 is -1x. 3 times x is +3x. 3 times -1 is -3. Okay. We can combine like terms. So we'll have -1/2 times x squared. Well, -1 plus 3x is a +2x. And we're still subtracting 3. So we just have to multiply by our half. So -1/2 times x, well, that's just going to be -1/2 x squared. Right? -1/2 times +2, well, it's going to be negative. Half times 2 is just 1, so we have a -1x or a -x. -1/2 times -3 is going to be positive, and it'd be 3/2, which is the same as 1/2. So y equals -1/2 x squared minus x plus 1/2. And that is our quadratic equation that goes with this parabola right here. We're going to look at one more example. So here is our graph. Go ahead and pause the video and try to identify your x-intercept. Well, we only have one, right? We have the point 2, 0. So that means when we're labeling P and Q, P is going to be equal to 2 and Q is going to be equal to 2. So we can go ahead and we can plug those. Now that we have y equals a times x minus 2 times x minus 2, we need to find an x and a y value that will help us find a. So I'm going to use this point they already found for me, 0, 4. So x is 0 and y is 4. So let's go ahead and plug those in. Now would be a good time to pause the video and try this for yourself. So y is 4, a we don't know yet, x is 0, right, and x is 0. Well, 4 equals a. 0 minus 2 is just negative 2. 4 equals a, and then negative 2 times negative 2 is 4. So if 4 equals a times 4, well, we can divide by 4 on both sides. Okay, divide by 4 on both sides. So a is just equal to 1. So we're going to put our a, our p, and our q into our equation and see what we have right now. We have y equals 1 times x minus 2 times x minus 2. Okay, well, if you think about it, if we are multiplying by 1, does that really change anything? It doesn't. So all we really have to do is take x minus 2 and multiply it by x minus 2. Again, you can use the box or your distribution. I'm going to give you a minute to multiply this out, and then you can check your answer in the video. After multiplying, you should get y equals x squared minus 4x plus 4. These are the 5 steps you use to write an equation of a parabola. So you want to memorize these 5 steps, practice them. Make sure to write down or take note of any questions you have so you can ask them tomorrow in class.